Hi everybody, Joe here from Shutter Speed Photography. Very nice to see your smiling faces again here on YouTube. Most people know that there are firmware updates for your Nikon Z series camera. They're very important to keep up with since they contain bug fixes and new features. Rumors have it that there is a major firmware update on the way for the Z6 II and Z7 II, maybe this month. But that isn't what I'm here to tell you about today. What a lot of people don't realize is that there are firmware updates for the Nikon Z lenses and the FTZ adapter as well. In fact, currently 7 Nikon Z lenses and the FTZ adapter has at least one or more firmware updates. Now, these updates are just as important to install as the firmware on your camera for a couple of reasons. One, the firmware corrects bugs in the lenses, and two, it ensures compatibility with future camera firmware updates. And since there's a big one around the corner, it's important. So, in this video, I'm going to show you what the current firmware versions are for all current Nikon Z lenses. Now, if you're watching this video months or maybe even years from when it was made, please check the Nikon website for the current version. You can also check the date that this video was made right down by the title here on YouTube. So next I'm going to show you how to check your current Nikon Z lens firmware to see if you're up to date. And of course, I'm going to show you how to update your Nikon Z lens firmware and the FTZ adapter as well. But before we get started, I'd just like to take a minute to say thank you for watching this video. I do appreciate you. And if anything in this video helps you out, please thank me by hitting the subscribe button and ring the bell so you get notified of future videos on this channel. Best of all, it'll make me smile, and it's free. So, thank you in advance. Now, with that out of the way, let's take a look at all the current firmware versions for the Nikon Z lens lineup. Now, it's important to note you can download the latest firmware from the Nikon website, and I'm going to post a link in the video description so that you can easily download any firmware that you may need for your lens or for your FTZ adapter. Now, I'm also going to post this list in the video description as well. Just keep in mind, it is as of the date the video was made, unless I otherwise specify. Okay, so now let me know what the current versions are. How do you check to see if you have the latest and greatest firmware from Nikon? Well, first, you'll need your Nikon Z series camera with the Z lens that you want to check attached to your camera. Press the menu button on the back of your Nikon Z series camera. Then scroll down the setup menu. Now, the setup menu is the icon on the left that looks like a wrench, okay? At the very bottom of that menu, it's a long scroll all the way down, you're going to see an option for firmware version, okay? Click OK on that option, and the firmware versions will be displayed on the back screen of your Nikon Z series camera. Now, you're going to see two sets of numbers there, okay? So, the firmware labeled C is for your camera, okay? That's the firmware version that's installed on your camera. You may want to check to see if you need an update while you're here. And then the firmware labeled LF, that's the one we're interested in. That's the one for your lens. Now, if you have the latest version, shut your camera off, remove your lens, and check the next one using the same process. Now, if you're checking your FTZ adapter, your firmware will look a little bit different when you check the back of the screen. You check it using the same exact process as we did the lens, but the labels are different. So when you select firmware version from the setup menu, you'll see firmware labeled C and M/A. Now, C, of course, stands for camera, and M/A stands for mount adapter. The MA version is the firmware for your FTZ adapter. Okay, so If you do need an update for your lens or adapter, here's what you need to do next. Okay? First, use the link in the video description to go to the Nikon website and download the latest firmware version for your lens. Okay? Oh, and by the way, I should mention, if you check your mount adapter and it shows just dashes, that's because you've never done an update and it needs an update. If you see that, that's okay. Okay, so for Windows users here, I'm going to give you an expert tip. Download the firmware to a directory on your computer that does not contain any other items, a completely blank directory. Or move it to one before you double click on the file after you download it from the Nikon website. You'll see why. So next we have to extract the firmware. So we can extract the firmware by double clicking on it. Now if you're on Windows, you'll see that when you double click that file, the firmware file does not display any message whatsoever on the screen. It doesn't indicate that it's completed or did any task in any way at all, but it did. Okay, so what it did was it created a new directory with the new firmware contained in it. Now, if you didn't put that firmware in a blank directory, you may miss the fact that it created a new folder because it may be buried in a long list of other folders within your directory, or if you did it on the desktop and you have a lot of items on your desktop, you may not have realized that it made a new folder. Okay, this tricks people up a lot, and myself included sometimes. So always download or move the firmware to an empty folder first. It just makes life easier before you double click on it. Next, you're going to need a memory card reader to install the firmware. You have a memory card reader, right? Now, I know with the newest Z series cameras, you can update your camera firmware via SnapBridge. However, you cannot update your lens or mount adapter firmware via SnapBridge. So you'll need a card reader. And honestly, folks, it's always a good idea to have one. And I will leave a link in the description of this video to a card reader should you need to purchase one. Okay? So, move that firmware from the folder that the update created to the memory card that you have connected to your computer via your card reader, okay? And drag that firmware over to the root directory of your memory card, okay? The root directory means the top level directory that is not inside of any other folders. Next, with your camera off, insert the memory card back into your camera. Okay, now when you turn the camera back on, you may see a warning on the back screen of the camera that the firmware for your lens or mount adapter is not compatible. This is okay, don't panic. Click on the menu button on the back of your camera, go back to that setup menu, that's the one that looks like a wrench, select firmware version at the bottom of the menu, and you will see the option to update your firmware. Okay, so go ahead and select OK to update your firmware. Now, you'll see a little progress bar on the back of your camera, and once completed, you'll be prompted to turn off and then turn back on your camera. Now, if you go back into the firmware menu after this process is complete, you will now have the option to delete the firmware. Since we no longer need it, we can go ahead and safely delete it. It's okay to remove from your memory card. It's just taking up space. Okay, you're also going to see that your lens or your mount adapter now displays the latest firmware version. So, congratulations! You now have the latest and greatest firmware installed for your product, ensuring that it will be compatible with future camera firmware and operate, hopefully, bug-free. So, that's all there is to it. Just repeat this process for each lens you need to update, or your adapter. If you own more than one Nikon Z series camera, you will only need to do the update one time and not on each camera, because the firmware will live on the lens or the mount adapter. So it doesn't live on the camera, so you only need to do it on one camera. Okay, so I hope you found this video helpful. And again, if this helped you out, please consider subscribing. Thanks again for watching YouTube. Feel free to leave a comment below. I do try to answer almost all of the comments as best I can. People who are familiar with this channel know that I really do my best to try and answer. So thanks again. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time, YouTube. Bye-bye.